And welcome back to Mixed Media Live. This is episode 33. We've done a lot of these at this point. I think we're somewhat veterans. It's been interesting to see how this has been going, seeing the reception as time has gone on. But before we continue with our awesome program for today, let's introduce ourselves. So my name is Irving Nestor. I'm a filmmaker and media entrepreneur. I own a company called Ariella. You can see my website at ariella.co.
Hey, I'm Nathan. I'm a video game developer and a 3D modeler.
And I'm Ben Costello. I'm a flute player and a media composer.
Yeah, and we're Mixed Media. So every week we're here Fridays at 7 p.m. talking about all things art and media, whether it's stuff that's in the news, whether it's philosophy, whether it's reviews on something particular, or whatever we want to talk about. In fact, we invite people on for interviews a lot of times. And one thing I want to shout out is that we're new to Rumble. So this is our second stream on Rumble. And shout out to Rob Sharma again for essentially sponsoring our ability to be on Rumble. Shout out to him. And you can help us out by going to mixedmedia.locals.com. There you can support us for $5 a month. This on the right side of the screen is actually a live whiteboard that is free for you to draw on and have fun with and troll us with, or whatever the heck you want to do with, if you support us there, along with a whole bunch of other perks, including getting in front of the line in the queue for reviewing your work, whatever work that you do, if we can review it, of course, subject to restrictions, blah, 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 blah. But yeah, so that's basically us. So we've got a pretty jam-packed day. Actually, first, is there anything special in your guys' weeks and all that?
Not really. It's been pounded with work, but other than that, pretty normal.
Yeah, I haven't done that much. I've been trying to do some networking with some other, young, aspiring local composers, but not too much other than that.
Yeah, networking is good. Go ahead.
Go ahead. And I think it's kind of irrelevant.
I was just going to say my week was pretty normal, just trying to offload as much work as I can so I can focus on my company stuff. But yeah, go ahead.
All right, I was want to ask Ben, have you heard the soundtrack for Aliens Fireteam?
I have not.
Oh, okay. It's it has music by Austin Wintory in it, but I'm pretty sure like a couple minutes of it, which is very strange. But yeah, it came out not too long ago, and then it probably died, as far as I'm aware. So I don't know. But yeah, I haven't heard it myself.
Yeah, no, I think we're gonna have to inundate Ben with video game music at some point and have him react to it. I would love to see it.
Sure.
What are each of us doing? So I'm talking about in a moment here. I'll be talking about the incident on the set of Rust with Alec Baldwin and the death of Halyna. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. I never heard anyone say it. What are you guys talking about?
I guess I'm responding to hot takes from the internet today. I guess it's my turn to do that. So not really a topic, but
yeah, the classic.
Yeah, I'll be doing the topics about Battlefront II and how some of the glitches make the game a lot better, and you should actively use the exploits.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting time. So yeah, like I said, I'll go first. Excuse me. So yeah, so this is a thing that I want to cover because it's been making headlines. I've read a bunch of articles, and I feel like people are misunderstanding things from two directions. There's the film direction, and then there's the firearms direction. There's like a lot of misunderstanding, and a lot of it is a little bit more due to equivocation or just misunderstanding of terminology. A lot of times I'll see, even by the reporters. You'll see them use a term that's not really supposed to be used that way, et cetera, et cetera. So first, a little overview of what we're talking about for those who don't know. So there's a film called Rust, of which the director of photography, the DP, another word for that is a cinematographer, her name is Halyna Hutchins, was killed by a live round shot by Alec Baldwin on the set of Rust. So that's the big overview. We're going to go to big details. But first, the goal is to respect the memory of Halyna. She's a real person who died. Unfortunately, I feel like a lot of people don't treat her like a human being. I don't think that's not specific to this particular incident, but that's often the case with like intrigue cases. Is like you find people throwing around people's names and stuff like that, without care. And so I hope I don't come off that way. It's more supposed to be an informative thing, and she just recently died, so I just don't want this to be interpreted as a sensational thing. If you pray for her soul, and so that's the disclaimer / my goal here. So first, starting with Halyna, who was she? So she was 42 years old. She's Ukrainian, and she was a cinematographer and journalist, credited for work on 30 plus films. I took a look at her IMDb and tried to see if I recognized anything. I didn't quite recognize anything, and it was hard for me to find stuff from the stuff that she's made for me to like really get an understanding of what her style would be or anything like that. So I won't be commenting on those things. But yeah, if you do know, she's done stuff called like Arch Enemy, Darlin, and Blind Fire. And this whole incident happened on October 21st. And it looks like her cinematography career had been particularly busy as of late. Looking at her IMDb, she's done a ton of stuff in the last 3 years. So yeah, she was very busy. And she's also married and left behind a child, which hurts me. Okay. So that's who Halyna is. What is Rust? So Rust is a film. I'll read the synopsis that I think comes from IMDb, if I remember where I pulled it from. It says, a 13-year-old boy left to defend for himself and his younger brother following their parents' death in the 1880s Kansas goes on the run with his long-estranged grandfather after he's sentenced to hang for the accidental killing of a local rancher. So that's the synopsis. Kind of an unfortunate overlap.
Irony. Yes.
Yeah. And the context behind this film is that this is actually a passion project for Alec Baldwin and the director, Joel Sousa. So they entered into this project together. I don't know why it's a passion project or anything like that. I have no idea. But apparently this is something that they feel deeply about to the point where they'll make this film without a big budget. That being said, the budget was $6 to $8 million, which is, for a Hollywood film, that's basically nothing, right? Or like that's pretty low. That's not nothing, but it's pretty low on the totem pole. A film like that, I wonder if what's that film called? Won many Oscars last year or the year before that. I can't remember the film, but there might have been a few films that can win Oscars at that level or get attention from those kinds of people anyway. So $6 to $8 million, and it was a crazy shoot atmosphere. They only had 21 days to shoot an entire feature film. That's absolutely insane if you don't know. Like, feature films...
Is there a reason why they had that constraint?
I think it's just the budget. I don't know how much people were paying themselves out. I don't know, I don't know anything about the details of the breakdown or anything like that. But 21 days is really short, guys. Like, to give you context, like, you typically shoot these films if you're shooting them, if you have the privilege to shoot them completely consecutively in around 3 months, right? So this is less than a month. This is 3 weeks. So 3 months to 3 weeks is a pretty insane difference for a feature film. So yes, very small film, tight budget, and super fast pace. Translation, extremely indie production. It was shot in Bonanza City, New Mexico, which is near Santa Fe and Albuquerque, I believe. I'm not familiar with the geography of the area, but that's what it says. Okay, so that's the backdrop. For me, I'm a filmmaker, so I obviously don't. I'm an indie filmmaker, so I don't have like the biggest budget experience or anything like that. I've been on sets definitely, but I don't have a diverse experience where I can say XYZ is normal for sure from my perspective. But I understand the rules of film, I understand the business of film, and so hopefully I can illuminate some things that have to do with the production and the terms used and et cetera, et cetera. The other thing is, that I've also shot guns before. That's a more recent development in my life. That's I think started in March. A few times. So again, not an expert, not a firearm safety expert by all means, but I have experience handling a firearm. So there's that as well. I've been following like gun YouTube channels for the lulz, like probably, I don't know, for years and years now, or not following even, just kind of poking around here and there. So I'm familiar with the community and the culture around it as well, but not as a participant is the disclaimer. Okay. So that's the backdrop. Now for terminology. This is where a lot of people have been throwing out words without explaining. Sometimes I feel like they don't explain because they're trying to associate certain things, or maybe they don't understand how to explain something, etc., etc. But it really gets to me because people are confused, because I see it in the comments, I see it in the opinion blogs and stuff like that. People get confused as to what terms mean. So the first term that we hear a lot with this incident was that Alec Baldwin was shooting a prop gun, right? So prop gun is a film term. So prop gun literally means a gun that is a prop, right? It does not mean a fake gun, which is, I think, what people think that means. It's anything that's...
Yeah, I was very confused about that. I was like, how do you kill someone with a prop gun? Because prop, yeah. So in the movie industry, are all props things that can be used? Like doesn't mean that they can't be used. You know what I'm saying? Like if I said a prop door, could the door be fully functional with a lock and stuff like that? You know what I'm saying?
That's a great question, actually. So yeah, what is a prop? A prop is anything under the purview of the property department or the props department. Prop is just short for property.
Never connect the word prop and property. Wow.
Yeah, I've never heard that either. So
yes, the film is full of a bunch of slang, a bunch of short words, and all that kind of stuff. So the prop department is the property department, and the property department handles anything that someone is going to handle, right? So it's loose.
Does that usage go back even further? Is that like a more recent thing that like theater has pulled in, or is that something that originates in theater?
That's a good question. I'm not sure about the word prop, but I do know, well, actually they use the word prop in theater, so I assume there's got to be a connection, maybe? I have no idea. But I know that the gun terminology in theater is completely different, because they don't use guns that are props in theater, as far as I understand. Well, you have a live audience. I'll go into an explanation as to why that would never make sense. But they use like things that have ammunition, like munitions, propellants and explosives and stuff like that. So they use different terminology across the board about those kinds of things, is my understanding, but I'm not familiar with it. So basically a prop is anything that's loose. So if I can handle something, if a character ever touches something, it's a prop. So literally, if I'm an assistant director or I'm a line producer, usually what they do is they take the script and they tear it down and they do what's called a breakdown. So what they do is they highlight everything that is potentially a prop. And anything that's potentially prop is something that is handled or touched by a character. So if it's like Johnny picks up the pencil is now a prop. If Johnny did not pick up the pencil, but the pencil is on the desk, and no one ever touches it, it's actually a set fixture. Very strange, but there's a lot of reasons why this delineation is done. It's so that the division of labor is as easy as to understand as possible. You don't want the set department to misunderstand, like, who's supposed to bring the pencil, and then, the pencil doesn't end up being there or something like that. So, for example, here's a great example. If I had a gun, like a real gun, like a proper, whatever, if I had a real gun and I affix it to a desk and no character will ever touch that thing, that is now a set object. It's like literally part of the set. So that's how things get delineated on sets. And that happens all the time. So a prop gun can be any gun. Real or fake, which is kind of the annoying thing, is like, again, this is slang terms that we're dealing with. You might have a prop gun that's not actually a functioning firing gun, but you call it a prop gun because it's standing in for a gun and it's a prop, right? So it's confusing. If it's supposed to be a toy gun in the script, right, you would call it like a prop toy gun. That's what you would call it. So yeah, that's what a prop gun is. The second thing is that there are many types of prop guns. So be ready for the many different kinds of prop guns and what they do. So I'm going to start from like the least, dangerous to the most dangerous. So the least dangerous is a rubber gun. Like it's literally just a silicon mold of a gun. And they're used a lot for a lot of hand-to-hand combat stuff. So think about like a action movie where like people are like pistol whipping each other and like, whatever. Or you have like scenes where like there's that mixed in with like really rapid firing and stuff like that. You might use a rubber gun so that no one accidentally gets whacked in the head with a piece of plastic or metal, none of which would be fun to get hit in the head with. So yeah, you might use a rubber gun for that. There are plastic guns. So this is a gun molded out of plastic. And these don't fire. They may or may not have moving parts at all. And as far as I can tell, they're mostly used for kids. Like if there's a scene where there's a kid that has to fire a gun or something like that. And now that I think about it, when I was doing research for this, I noticed that I'm remembering scenes where kids shoot guns. And I think they're all CG invariably, which makes a lot of sense. But yes, so they use a plastic gun. If you've never held a gun, guns can be quite heavy. It can be quite taxing even a pistol is actually a lot heavier than you think. So it can be quite taxing for a child to constantly hold up or something like that. So yes, there are plastic guns. There are airsoft guns. So they sometimes use airsoft guns. Airsoft is a sport where you shoot pellets. Now, I'm not sure in the list that I was looking at whether they're confusing airsoft gun with like a gas blowback replica. I'll explain in a moment, but I'm not actually sure why you would ever use an airsoft gun, given that shooting pellets would never be useful nor advisable on a set. I mean, you could hit someone in the eye or something like that. I mean, it can also be quite dangerous. When you play airsoft, you have a lot of gear on usually. Yes, then there are replica guns. So these are non-functional, but they're solid metal. They may or may not be full fidelity, right? So they may or may not actually have moving parts or be exactly to the spec of the real weapon. It may have a plug in the front, a metal plug, or you may not be able to load it or something like that. But it's a full-on replica, but it doesn't work. There's no way it could ever fire a bullet. It's just a dummy, right? These are used mostly if you're not firing. So if someone's picking up a prop gun from a table, right, and giving to someone else, whatever the scene is, but they don't intend to fire it, they will use these replica guns instead of anything else, right? So it looks nice and real and metal. Light properties are extremely hard to fake. It's very hard to, unless you mess with something and try to get metal sheen or like scratches on metal, it's very hard to make plastic look like metal and stuff like that. So that's why they use those replica guns instead. Then there's gas blowback. Gas blowback is when you have like a little cylinder of usually what's compressed CO2, and this replica gun essentially maybe looks just like or slightly modified from its real counterpart, but it has a CO2 cartridge on the inside, and when you pull the trigger, it lets out that compressed CO2 gas out of the muzzle, and part of the gas gets chambered, or not chambered. I'm not very good at firearm terms, guys. That CO2 gas gets cycled back into the slide, thus pushing the slide back to simulate the action of the weapon. So you're actually releasing a gas, and the slide gets moved back and forth. Now, this motion is just motion, right? So the slide is usually easier to glide on these weapons. It doesn't require as much force for them to glide backwards. So all it's trying to do is give the illusion that the weapon's actually cycling, right? That this actually has motion to it. It does not have any kickback or any other effects like that. It's not going to give you recoil. There'll be some.
I was looking it up, right? Because I was thinking, I'm pretty sure gas blowback is a type of airsoft gun, right?
Yes.
I looked it up, and it says that all airsoft replicas, gas blowback guns tend to be lighter. The term blowback comes from the enhanced recoil of these guns.
Yes. So you get a feedback, you get physical feedback, but it's mostly as far as I've understood, and I think like a long time ago, maybe when I was in high school, a friend of mine gave me his airsoft gas blowback semi-auto pistol to shoot. And I remember feeling the recoil, but it's not anything like shooting a gun. It's more like you get the some like rumble motors, some controller rumble motors. Yeah,
it's
a little bit more specific than that. It like gets the direction of motion correct, but it's like it's just like it gives you like it's like the same thing as a rumble motor, where it's like you're not supposed to actually feel like that you're shooting a gun, like actually, it's just something. Right, exactly. You get the momentum of the slide moving back, right? Is like what like ends up applying the force to you. Maybe a little bit of the gas pressure, but I highly doubt it, as there's nothing plugging the muzzle or anything like that. So yes, and I think there are gas blowback replicas that are not airsoft guns. I think that might be the case, that may just be designed for representing their real counterparts. Okay, we're not done yet. There are things called non-guns, which is a film-specific term for guns that have an explosive, or a replica that has an explosive on the inside of the gun. So there's something called a squib, which is very common in film. Squibs are really small explosive packets. You might use them for blood bursts and stuff like that, where someone gets shot. Or you might use them in Saving Private Ryan, all the dust coming up on the D-Day scene of the machine gun fire hitting the sand. All of that's practical. None of that's VFX. And so what they did was they planted a tiny explosive for every one of those bullet landings in the sand the day before. They spent all night doing it. And so what you're seeing when you're seeing that scene of the bullets hitting the sand is actually these tiny explosives going off, shooting the sand up. They're extremely directional, which I think is where the safety comes from, right? So you can attach it to someone's body. The force gets applied directionally outward, so it doesn't really apply much force to you, right? So it can be done pretty safely. So what they do is they put one of those squibs inside of the muzzle of a gun designed for this particular use case, and the trigger is electrically connected to the squib. And when you pull the trigger, it fires the explosive off, and you get an effect. Now, the problem with these is that nothing actually actuates, right? So, like, in none of these designs does the cylinder on a revolver rotate, or like the slide on a pistol actually move, which makes them apparently not used terribly often, is what I understand. And the last thing is an actual firearm that you're using as a prop, right? And this is a firearm with what's called blanks, which I will explain in a moment. But they're universally applicable, right? You can use them in all scenarios that are safe, right? They're not like literally safe. I'll explain that in a moment. But you can use them in pretty much every situation because you're using the real gun. You get a good amount of force feedback, and you get all the effects happening live time. And yes, that's exactly what it is. You get more realistic recoil. The actor reacts to what they're doing a lot more realistically. And yes, the problem is that they're a lot more expensive. You need a lot of planning, and it requires a lot of safety measures to be put in place. Those are the cons as to why you might not use them for literally every scene, where you might be shooting at a distance. Okay. So on the set of Rust, they had several of these guns, as you would expect, because you want to use the safest thing possible, or the least. I mean, think about it just from the AD's perspective, or the the getting a move on things perspective. You want to get things done as quickly as possible. So if you can cut out the safety steps and use a plastic gun or a rubber gun instead, you're going to do that, right? So they have all these kinds of guns on set. Not all these kinds of guns, literally. I don't know how many of them they did. They at least had 3 of these types of guns on set. Okay. Now, there's the gun that Alec Baldwin was using in this particular scene is called a long 45 Colt. So I have a picture of it right here. Let's see. There we go. So this is a long 45 Colt. If you're listening to audio only, you can Google it. But basically, it's like a typical cowboy gun. If you hear anyone talk about this gun, they usually talk about, the Wild West. It's the common gun in Western movies. As you can see, it probably gives you that feeling instantly when you look at it. And it's a weapon with a very interesting history that I won't bore you with. But it's a long 45 Colt. Now, that's what it's replicating, but it's not actually a long 45 Colt. What it actually is a gun made by, I believe, let's see. Oh, I lost the name of the firearm manufacturer. I think the name of the firearm manufacturer is Piety. It's an Italian company. The reason why Piety makes these long 45 Colts, these long Colt 45s, is that they don't make them anymore, right? Colt doesn't manufacture these anymore, as far as I understand. So a different company makes these replicas. Now, there's an important difference for this to all make sense, is that Piety actually attaches an extra safety to the long 45. And or it's Pieta. I found the name. Pieta. That's what it is. And I'll explain that in a moment because it won't make sense until I explain how this particular weapon actually operates. So this particular weapon is what's called a single action revolver. So it's a revolver because that thing, you see that cylinder looking thing that's not the barrel that would rotate if you fired the particular rounds, that's called a cylinder. And it makes it a revolver, essentially. I'm really oversimplifying it so that people who don't know anything, can understand for sure. And that particular thing on a modern revolver would rotate automatically. What that means is when I pull the trigger, the cylinder would rotate to the next bullet, like in the next live round, if it still has rounds left, upon releasing the trigger, right? So I pull, it fires. Upon releasing, the cylinder rotates to the next position so that when you pull the trigger again, it will fire again, right?
I think you might be slightly off. I could be wrong. I'm also no gun expert, right? But what you're describing, I think, is a double action revolver, right?
Yes, that is double action. Did I confuse that?
And I believe how those work is as you pull the trigger, it resets where the hammer was.
Yes,
and when you pull it
does that as
further.
well.
Okay, so not upon releasing does it move. It's as you're pulling, it moves. You get what I'm saying?
No. So it's both. So when you pull the trigger, So I'll explain what a hammer is first. That was my next thing. So the hammer, in the movies when they're like, I'm gonna kill you, and they go first, that thing is called the hammer. Usually when they do that, it's completely unnecessary. Like, there's no reason to pull back the hammer unless you're trying to ensure a lighter trigger or something like that. But it's kind of just a movie thing for modern pistols. But on this particular pistol, you have to pull the hammer. So let me explain. So on a double action revolver, when you pull the trigger, it doesn't matter whether the hammer is pulled back or not. It will the trigger pull itself will pull the hammer back, and it'll come back and hit the bullet.
Yeah, that's
and
what
the bullet will go flying. Yes, you're right. But when you release the triggers, then the cylinder cycles. It's not important for this. Yeah. Yeah. So that's how that functions. Now, a single action means that those two things don't happen with the trigger. The trigger only controls one action. It only controls the release of the hammer. It doesn't even reset the hammer. It doesn't move this. I believe it doesn't even move the cylinder upon release. All it does.
I think moving the hammer moves the cylinder, right?
Right. Exactly. So when I pull the trigger, a bullet comes out, the hammer goes down, but it doesn't come back up if I pull the trigger again. I have to manually cock it back, which is what you commonly see in those Western movies is they constantly go, right? They do that over and over again because that's how this particular revolver functions. It's single action. There's a reason I explained that, I promise. The old version of this weapon actually did not fire or had a problem with not misfiring. That's a particular term that I'm going to come to later. But it would fire accidentally sometimes. The reason why it would fire accidentally sometimes is that the hammer, even though it wasn't cocked back, might jiggle just enough to strike the round and send the bullet flying. It wasn't that common, but it was common enough to be a concern for the Army. So, that's a whole history thing that I'm not getting into. But the reason why that's important for here is that Pietta, the new manufacturer of this firearm, modified it so that it would no longer have that problem. I won't explain the mechanism, but essentially there's an actual safety now, right? Before, the natural safety was that you have to pull back the hammer, right? That was the natural safety. It would not fire, or it's not intended to fire without pulling back the hammer. But the new version safety has a separate safety that you have to push. It's technically push in, or not away, but push in, and then that issue goes away. So a lot of people are saying, oh, this weapon had issues. Well, the version that they were using, according to the police department, was actually the Pietta version of the firearm that I'm not sure if they modified or not. I have no information about that. So there you go. Now, blah, 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 blah. So, great. So here, I have a 3D printed, here it is. I printed this morning. A 3D printed representation of a 45 round. I don't think this is actually...
on audio only does not know what's happening.
Right, exactly. So again, look these things up. So if you want to know what a 45 round looks like, it looks kind of like this. I printed in gold PLA, which is looking like it might not show up well on camera. But basically, a bullet has 3 parts. It has the top part here, the round part, that is what is actually the bullet, right? So we commonly refer to this whole thing as a bullet, but that top round part is the actual bullet. The bottom part here, between, it's so hard to see, I apologize, but between the bullet and this bottom bit that looks a little bit disconnected, that's called the cartridge. And that holds the gunpowder, right? That actually propels the bullet out of the gun. So it has the... I don't think it's technically an explosive. It's because I think that it technically ignites. It doesn't explode. But it has the propellant on the inside of it. The back of the bullet has what's called gunpowder. Mm-hmm. The back of it has what's called a primer. This is what actually lights the propellant on the inside of the cartridge. This primer gets struck by the hammer that we're talking about, which sets the bullet off. Now, generally speaking, these bullets are considered to be relatively inert if they're stored properly, if you don't store them in heat or something like that. But like when you're handling bullets, it's not a big deal, right? If you see someone like moving bullets around, they're not like scared that the bullet might randomly go off. That's not a thing. These things are, pretty inert. You really need to cook them, like, have a fire or something.
At least, or at least in this in those areas, because I'm pretty sure there was a time where they were actually kind of sketch.
These bullets, I don't even think.
Yeah, I think it was maybe was it World War I factories where you couldn't like just be tossing around bullets or something like that. You have to actually like be careful with them.
Maybe, yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not the biggest munitions history person or anything like that. Okay. So those are those things. Now, a blank, the reason I tell you the parts of a round is that a blank is this minus the bullet. So take off the bullet and just leave the cartridge and the primer, and you've essentially got a blank. Now, usually they also take out a little bit of gunpowder so that it doesn't kick as hard, right, as it normally would. But but you don't have to do that for that to be a blank. This is what the military does is they essentially take, they manufacture them specifically for the military these days. But essentially you can take this bullet off of the round, and you'll have a blank. And usually what they put on front is either like a little bit of wadding or just like in some cases just a little piece of cardboard just so the contents don't fall out when you're loading it or anything like that. So that's what a blank is. Now, you still get recoil, but it's going to be a little bit less. Part of that's because for safety concerns. And it's hard to describe if you've never fired a firearm before. But when you shoot off a round, it feels like you're literally trying to contain an explosion. It is a very like visceral experience when you fire a gun, especially if it's your first time doing so, and especially if you're shooting anything bigger than 9mm or even 9mm. If you're not expecting it, it might be kick a little harder than you might think. But this is a big gun. It's hard to. I'll show you in a moment, but this is a big gun.
For reference, what do you say? It's 45 caliber, right? That means like 0.45 inches in diameter or something like that.
I believe so.
Which is pretty. That's pretty thick as far as bullets go.
Yes.
Talking about 9mm before as being the edge of large, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. They're also extremely loud. They produce smoke and flash, very similar to the actual firearm. And it's very hard to undersay how loud a gun is. They are loud. Like, they're loud when I went to the range with my mufflers on and earplugs on, which I don't think many people actually double protect their ears, but I was paranoid, so I did that. And still, they're very loud, even through that much reduction of sound. So extraordinarily loud objects. And troops in training will use these things, and they can be made by hand with simple machinery. So, like, literally can just buy like this, simple mechanical machine that you put the bullet in, and you pull the lever, and it literally pops the bullet off of the cartridge, and then you can crimp, fold like the ragged edges so that it's not so ragged anymore, and then cover it up yourself. So you can make blanks on your own. Okay, last terms, I promise. Oop, New York. The last terms are the words cold, hot, and live. The media does not understand these words, apparently. At least I'm going to explain them what they mean in a firearms context. I assume that's what they also mean on a set, although I may be wrong about that. And I can't imagine you conflating these terms on a set and switching them around or something like that. That just sounds like a recipe for a disaster. So, cold, hot, and live. A cold gun is an empty gun. I mean, there's nothing in it. Like, not even blanks, right? There's literally nothing in the gun. A cold gun is an empty gun. A hot gun is this is something you mostly use on a film set. A hot gun is a gun loaded with blanks or something that will actually go off, right? That's not the same thing, though, as a live gun. A live gun is something that has live ammunition in it, meaning this whole thing. A hot gun would be a gun with blanks inside. So I see a lot of articles not understanding that what cold meant. A lot of people think that cold means that it didn't have live munitions in it. No, it means it has nothing in it, zero. And that'll be very important, very important. Okay, so why does Hollywood use blanks? Well, I've got a video that my friend took of me shooting a 45 modern pistol. I think this one's me shooting a Glock. I'm not 100% sure. For the first time. Like, these are some of my first shots, so my form is terrible. Don't judge me. My form is still terrible, to be honest. Don't judge me. And I probably received the recoil a lot more wimpish than people who are used to these things. So here's me firing for the first time. Let me rewind that real quick. This one's in slow motion. So you can see that the force essentially causes my arm to involuntarily jerk in a very particular manner that I could not naturally produce. In fact, I know this from years back because I came up in VFX. That's how I started in film. And one of the first things you learn is how to do gunfire, like fake gunfire and stuff like that, because it's so common. And no matter how hard you ask your actors to jerk themselves or to jerk themselves in particular ways, it never looks right. The reason, and what you'll end up doing is you'll end up cutting out a frame to try to make it jump in a more lively fashion. So you literally skip a bit of time so that it looks like the weapon goes up faster, right? That it normally does. But it's still, the body mechanics still don't look quite right. Here, I'll show you one real time of me shooting a 45 a few times. Here it is. Oh, I'm lining up. There it is. You can see me, I'm still getting used to it. I'm like surprised by my own, by what's happening. But it's quite a visceral experience. So there, you can see it. So that's one of the reasons they use live rounds. And I think probably the most compelling reason to use live rounds. Although I will say that the other, not live rounds, sorry. Whew. Let me clarify real quick. Blanks, not live rounds. You don't use live rounds on sets, which will come in play in a moment. But while you use blanks is for that particular reason. More importantly is you'll use blank, or not more importantly, other reasons you might use blanks are for volumetric and active smoke, right? Especially on older firearms. So, you can do smoke CGI, but if you're going to be shooting like hundreds of rounds in a film and you want them to look like they're interacting with the environment, the wind, interacting in 3D, then you might do it for that that reason as well.
Now, I really know nothing about this stuff, but I read some comments from people who appear to know quite a bit more about firearms than I do, which is nothing, commenting that that's not even thinking about smoke isn't realistic because the kind of gun that is used on this film and any kind of Western film, right, they would have used black powder instead of white powder, which would have produced a lot thicker smoke, and it's not feasible to film with that smoke. So even though we're already losing realism by not using the historically accurate powder, so
yeah,
is that a concern then? That why is realism some degree of lesser realism with smoke important?
I can actually think of a movie where there is a lot of smoke, Glory, which is a Civil War movie, and there's a lot of smoke when they shoot off, and that, as I said, Civil War, so they're talking about the similar sort of era. But yeah, other than that, yeah, I guess I don't watch olden times gun movies, so I wouldn't know that what goes on in other ones.
Yeah, from the VFX perspective, I imagine that what you would do is you would essentially gussy up the existing smoke, even if you're using the modern what's called smokeless powder, even though it does smoke a little bit. So what you might want to achieve the around the muzzle, get that smoke, that very volumetric, reacting with the air, moving around the space as it naturally would, moving around the person as it naturally would. When you're doing VFX, a lot of things are very 2D. It's hard to realize if you're watching a movie. That's because they're good at their jobs. But a lot of things are actually 2D. They're not actually like 3D, three-dimensional. So you might want to get that little bit of practical that you then exaggerate with a lot of those 2D assets that you add in, right? That might be one reason. I don't think smoke is like the number one reason. If I'm just doing it just for the smoke, I don't know if that would be compelling enough. I think it's more for the recoil and the actors as well, for their for them to feel it. It's a very visceral feeling when you pull the trigger on something that explodes in your hand, and so they react as such. And the loudness too. I assume you're going to startle your other actors for reals, right? If they're supposed to be reacting in a scene or something like that. And you also, miscommon understanding as well that I've seen is that you get the flash. You don't actually get the flash on film. The reason why is film's 24 frames a second, and the chances that you catch the flash in that 24 frames a second is actually pretty low. You probably saw flash in the film that I put up, but that's because someone's cell phone camera was probably filming at like 60 FPS or something like that, so you could actually see the flash. So the flash is almost always added in post. And it's also not for the sound, because the sound is almost added, is invariably added in post, because you cannot record that loud of a sound in any consistency or anything, realistic or anything like that on set. Okay. So those are some reasons why you might use live rounds on set. Now, how ubiquitous, not live rounds, my goodness, sorry, hot rounds on set. So you might use blanks on set. The reason I say this as well is that it's extraordinarily common. Like, it's much more common than you think. In practically every movie that has guns in it, there are scenes with blanks. Alec Baldwin knows this. Everyone on set knows this. It's actually not that uncommon at all. It's extraordinarily common. John Wick, Bond films, literally anything, And that's why I think people have become a little bit accustomed to what it looks like, because they just assume everything is CG, when that's actually not the case. Like, most things are actually practical that way. Especially if you can do it safely in a scene, you're probably going to want to do it because you have the budget to have all the safety precautions. Speaking of safety precautions, here is what's supposed to happen. And we're going to compare it to what did happen. I think it'll be interesting. So, general firearm safety tips. You don't point the gun at something that you're not willing to kill or destroy. This is the first thing that I learned. I learned it, when I first learned about gun safety. I learned it when I got, a little training at the range, is you never point a gun at something you're not willing to kill or destroy. You always assume that if it were to go off, someone will die. These things are not treated lightly, right? The second thing is finger off the trigger unless you're ready to fire. So the movies actually make you think that this is not a thing, but even soldiers will do this, right? So, in movies you see their fingers always on the trigger and they're like running around with their finger on the trigger. That's extraordinarily dangerous even for themselves. And it doesn't take much to move your finger outside of the trigger guard so that you don't accidentally pull the trigger and shoot yourself, right? Even if you're in like a panic situation like that, you're going to remove your finger when you're not intending to fire. So never put your finger on the trigger unless you intend to fire. Third thing is always check the status of a weapon before you assume the status of the weapon. Again, I learned this in my training. It's very particular. Like, when you go to a range, it's not a joke. Like, people, it's a common activity, but it's not a funny act. It's not like people are like being funny, right, around.
Yeah, I've seen quite a few videos of like range videos where the people tend to like take it super seriously. I remember one dude was shooting something. I think it was some rifle, right? And he like turned a little bit, right, with it in his hand, such that, like, how like in the range, right, in an indoor range, you have this sort of dividers between people, if you know what I'm talking about. The left and the right side of people will be like these barriers, and like once the dude like you do, I don't think he wasn't really thinking, I guess, right, that he's turning with the weapon in his hand. I think he was going to talk to somebody. But once the gun like pointed in such a way that it passed the divider, like some dude just slammed the gun into the table.
Yeah, no, like it's no, like people are really, really, really serious about their gun safety at, these kinds of places. So like people could smell that I was a first timer when I walked in. And I was getting like quasi stalked the first time I walked in because people smelled green, right? Which is a good thing, right? You want people to be very particular about how they handle something that's, in most cases literally meant to kill things, right? So, you got to be careful. And on a revolver here, I've actually printed the entire cylinder of a revolver. It's actually the exact Colt 45 cylinder that Alec Baldwin had. This is the cylinder part of that Colt 45 that we were talking about earlier. And so you see on the inside here, I've got a few rounds. Here's the one I was using as an example. Oh, right here. That you can put into one of those slots right there to load the weapon, and this thing turns as you cock the hammer. so that you cycle to new bullets, allowing you to hold 6 bullets in the gun at one time. Now, I don't have the whole thing printed, and I couldn't find a model of the whole thing anyway. But the thing that people need to appreciate is that this is actually relatively easy to check whether it's hot or cold. Never mind live or cold. Easier than a normal firearm, because a modern magazine-fed firearm, where you pull the magazine out and you can't see the rounds underneath. You can't. In some magazines, you can't see how many weapons you have or how many bullets you have left in your magazine. On a revolver, all you have to do is rotate, and you can actually see, like, there's a gap on the side of the gun where you can see the brass protruding just a little bit off to the side. So you can just rotate until you're confident you've seen all 6. And if you see air, then it's empty. If you see brass, then it's not empty. So it's very easy to tell on a revolver whether something is cold or hot. Much easier than on a modern gun. Okay, and the last thing is culture. Like I was mentioning earlier, gun culture is you watch gun YouTubers, they are extremely particular. Even if they're just in a room alone with a camera, the culture around these things are so safety oriented that if someone doesn't clear it in front of the camera in the video, the audience will get mad. Like, literally, you'll see a bunch of comments like, "What are you doing? Like, you forgot to check. You forgot to check." That's the general culture around gun safety, is extremely particular. And I would hope that culture is imparted on anyone who's asked to handle a real firearm that could actually kill someone. And the last thing is, don't mix live and hot guns, and that will come into play later. Okay. Now, for the film procedure, is that the first AD is usually the one who's responsible for all safety on set. I don't mean that the first AD is responsible for, particular procedures or coming up with procedures, anything like that, but it's almost like, the buck stops at the first AD's desk, right? So if the first AD notices something unsafe going on, the first AD is responsible for speaking up first and foremost. If someone has a complaint and it comes to the first AD, they're responsible for handling that complaint, taking it seriously, and doing whatever they have to do from there. So the first AD is essentially the safety officer on set. And AD stands for assistant director, for people who don't know. And I've read a lot of blogs of master armorers to understand what the procedures on set, and it seems pretty similar. It seems as though there are union rules, and then there are rules specific to the particular armorer who might be working on a set on top of the union rules. So they vary very slightly, but it's essentially the same thing. So basically, first, everyone gets a daily call sheet telling them whether there will be weapons on set. So everyone's aware whether today is a weapons day or not. Second, there's a daily meeting with the first AD and the armorers about safety stuff. So whether, whatever concerns there may be, or like reviewing procedure or things like that. Every morning, the first AD meets with the master armorer and his or her lackeys, and they go over what types of weapons they'll be using, if they'll be using blanks, etc., etc.
I have a question real quick.
Yes.
Is this are you explaining what the standard is, or what happened, or both?
This is the standard, not what happened.
Okay.
This is the standard. The fourth thing is that during setup and rehearsal, only fingers or rubber replicas are used as placeholders. So there's no practicing with the firearm, and I'll explain how that works later. You don't mess around. The armor doesn't just say, I want to practice, and give you the gun with blanks in it. That's not going to happen. Instead, they give you a rubber gun or some stand-in instead. Eye and ear protection is handed out liberally to anyone who needs it or wants it. When setup is finished, actors return to set and do a rehearsal with the rubber guns. And when they're ready to film, the armorer comes on set, presents the weapon for inspection. The actors, first assistant director, camera operation, dolly teams, boom op, and also union shop stewards and anyone else in the room are given an opportunity to inspect. So if you say, I want to make sure, you're supposed to be given that opportunity to look at the weapon to make sure its status is correctly reported. From what I can understand, though, it's typically the master armorer will take a look at will load the weapon right before handing it with blanks if it's blanks. Check the weapon to see that's functioning properly. Sometimes that means actually firing off a round. Checking the barrel to make sure that there's nothing inside. Checking literally anything that can go wrong. Presenting it to the first AD. Now, presenting it does not mean giving it to the first AD. Presenting it means showing it to the first AD. So you take the firearm, again, nothing is ever pointing at a human being, so usually carrying it something like this, pointed at the ground. You carry it to the first AD with it being open, and the first AD looks at it, actually looks at it, and says, clear, and then you repeat back, clear, and you go over to the actor, and what you do with the actor is that you do the same exact thing. You have it open, you're not allowed to hand it to the actor until the actor says, clear. Gives you a confirmation that they also see that the weapon is clear. So you present to the actor looks at it and says, clear, and then they grab the firearm, and then at that point, they are not allowed to actually load it. They're not allowed to close it if it's like a swing-out revolver, which this is not, or they're not allowed to put the magazine in if it's a magazine-fed thing, until the first AD recognizes that everyone is ready and says, weapons hot, at which point you are allowed to load. Armorers, prop people, stunts, assistant directors announce weapons are hot. That's what I said. When you're finished loading, people say fire in the hole multiple times as the camera starts rolling so that people understand this is going off, right? Okay. Now, when the take is finished, everyone stays put. No one moves. Armorer takes the gun and clears it. And if they're going to go again, the armorer is going to reload the gun and repeat the entire process. And this happens every single time. So a few quotes from some experienced master armsmen. Each time a gun is handed to a performer, the armorer must open the weapon's breech and present it to the performer with verbal confirmation, such as the weapon is clear. When the performer is satisfied that the gun is not loaded, they should audibly confirm clear. If it's not supposed to be loaded, right? They're talking in that context. When it is returned to the armorer following the take, the same clear verbal confirmation is required. The weapon is loaded at the express instruction of the first AD, meaning you can't even load the weapon, like I said. And after cut is called, the performer returns the gun to the armorer, who will open the breech and verbally confirm to the first AD that the gun is clear and safe. Only blank or inert ammunition is brought to set and must be controlled at all times by the armorer, which is referred to as the chain of custody, right? So you're not supposed to let anyone else, if you're the armorer, handle any of these things. Just imagine it from a nefarious perspective, right? Someone could load an actual, it's easy to buy a bullet, right? Anyone can bring a bullet to set, and load it in, and if they're trying to do something bad, right? So you are the only one who's supposed to be touching, you and your assistants are the only people who are supposed to be touching these things at all. Like I said, when you show people, you're not even giving it to them. You're literally just presenting it to them. And when you give it to the actor, you're not even letting them touch it until they verbally confirm that everything is safe. Okay. All right, I'm going along. I'm going to try to laze through this. So the players involved include Halyna herself, who the deceased, and she was unionized with IATSE. There's Dave Halls, the assistant director. Some interesting things about Dave Halls is that in 2019, there were complaints about him not following safety protocols on other sets, including a time he was fired on, literally fired, from a movie called Freedom's Path for unintended discharge of a firearm, particularly.
What's his role?
Assistant director, right? So he's like the head
so he's
safety.
the guy in charge of this.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
I'm not sure if he discharged the weapon. I assume not. I assume someone else unintentionally discharged the weapon, but he's the safety person, and he took the fall for it. That's how serious these things are, right? Maybe some protocol wasn't being enforced, right? The director's name is Joel Souza, who's actually shot as well because the round went through the DP and Enter the Director, but he is alive. And there's Alec Baldwin, who's an actor. Everyone knows who he is. He's also credited as a producer. I just want to clarify something that a lot of people are talking about his culpability as a producer. I don't know, legally speaking, I can't speak to that because I'm sure there's a bunch of relevant statutes that I'm not going to read. But about liability and stuff like that. But he's likely acting like a, not as a actual producer in that he's running the set. He's likely a producer in name only. Probably because this is a passion project, he's probably partly funding it. He's probably not like literally acting as a producer. Then there's the armorer, whose name is Hannah Gutierrez-Reed. She's the armorer and weapons master, and she's the only armorer and weapons master. She's daughter of a Hollywood legend, Thel Reed, who is a coach for such things, for firearm stuff, so he'll coach actors and how to handle firearms if they're doing cool stuff. He's like that kind of guy. He teaches them how to do the bad A stuff. He's a quick draw champion, which is interesting. So he's particularly involved in a lot of Westerns. Django Unchained he did. He's the weapons master for. And he does safety, right? So her dad is literally in this industry. He's like, a well-known figure in Hollywood. This is only her second time as the armorer. She is 24 years old. And likely her connection to her dad landed her this gig. Is pretty typical way to land such things. She worked on a movie called The Old Way, starring Nicolas Cage, and she accidentally discharged the firearm on that film 3 times without warning, prompting Nick Cage to actually walk off set. That's how aggravating it was. That Nick Cage walked off.
How does she? How's she still in the union after doing that?
I'm gonna say it's her dad, but I don't know. So
I can't imagine, like, I mean, there's nothing equivalent in the musical world, but like, I don't know if you like. I'm sure there's some like non-fatal equivalent, like in recording, like if you like.
You drop a tube
walk in. No, like you're like while you're recording something, if you like repeatedly will like walk into the room while the orchestra's playing or something, like you're not going to be asked back. Like I'm sure there's like stupid things like that obviously don't have fatal consequences, but like your career is over if you like how is your career not over if you do that?
I don't know. So to be
was it
fair,
3 times in the same day or 3 times separately?
The same day, I'm pretty sure.
How do you, I don't even, okay, you do it once, right? Okay, you're being negligent. But you think like you would start paying more attention, especially after the second time when you realize, okay, whatever I'm doing really is not working,
Dude, it's very hard to accidentally discharge a firearm if you know what you're doing. And I'll say that, again, as someone who's handled these things, the idea that you accidentally discharge it is so like revolting, just like from how I've been habituated. And how you think about these things when you go to a range, like, this is dangerous, so be careful. These are not as dangerous because there are no bullets involved. Well, we'll get to that. But there shouldn't be any bullets involved. But they're still dangerous. You're still lighting around in a somewhat pressurized, not as pressurized chamber. And that can burn someone, that can deafen someone, and that can, if you put it close enough to someone's head, you can kill them. While they're a lot safer, obviously, than having bullets on set, it's not completely safe. So it's bizarre, to say the least. But here, I'll give her a bone. So the prop master on that movie said that she was actually professional and did a good job, as well as her coworker from this particular production. So I put that in because I want to be fair to her. And mention what people have said about her. Now, I don't think these particular people are qualified to say whether or not she does a good job. A prop master is not trained in this, so I don't see what that's worth. But that's what happened. She reportedly told a crew member, and this is again a witness saying this, not me saying that, that she was unsure of her ability to handle the safety of these weapons well due to lack of experience. And if I were to use some conjecture, I would say that it's probably because the particular types of weapons they were using were older weapons, and she might be used to handling modern firearms. These are very particular things. Things don't work this way anymore with these weapons.
Again, like, isn't that a red flag? I mean, I'm just trying to imagine, like, as a musician, again, with like less deadly, not deadly at all consequences, but like, I don't know, if you try to hire some musician, to play like some, non-standard, like play some, I don't know, some like South American bamboo flute or something, and they say, I don't think I've only picked this thing up like once in my life, I'm not sure I can do it, then you're not gonna hire them, right? Like,
I don't know. We'll get to it. Now about the miscellaneous crew. They were all unionized, so this was a unionized production. They had negotiated hotel agreements where they would be staying nearby set. They were 3 weeks out of pay. So the production had failed to give them their checks for 3 weeks. And now to mention the hotel thing, they actually got moved last minute to hotels in, I think, Albuquerque or Santa Fe. I've seen reports of both, so I'm not sure which is true. Which is about an hour plus away from set location, which will aggravate your crew, right? Because now they have to drive, they have to count for driving every morning, and they had already negotiated that they would be staying near set. They're unionized and everything. They had already negotiated that in their contracts. There was a formal complaint by the crew, including Halyna, about the set conditions, including failure to comply with contracts and failure to comply with firearm safety rules specifically. So this is something that went through the process. They actually sent information to IATSE, and they had voiced their concerns to the producers and whatnot. So this was a known concern specifically for firearms, and I don't think anyone disputes this claim and it sounds like 1,000,000,001 people are saying that they've done this. The day before the incident, the prop master, so this is the boss of the armor, but not really because the armor has to follow their own protocol. But in terms of department, the prop master is in charge of all props, right? The prop master walked off set and quit, which is not normal. This is the day before the incident. They just literally walked off set. Now, normally as a procedure for if you're so mad you're going to quit, you have to go through the union. I mean, that's, their own union rules tell you have to do that. So this person was so mad that they didn't even go through the normal process of quitting and just walked off set and never came back. And which means they had to replace that person with a non-union worker who was new to everything the morning of the incident. So this person didn't know anything about this film. They apparently talked to 4 or 5 different prop masters in the area, in the Santa Fe area, to try to see if someone would come forward to help them last minute, and they found this person. And that day, I believe, the day of the incident, in the morning, many of the crew members had walked out in protest temporarily to protest the conditions, including the conditions of the firearm safety on set. And Halyna apparently had planned to join them in a second protest. She has an Instagram post about the conditions on set. And as an aside, she's an above line person, right? So this film is hers in a way, right? So above the line means that she's probably going to get some, cut of the film where she's being paid, distinctly better than everyone else on set. So she has a stake in this. And the fact that it's so bad that she'll post on Instagram trashing the film, it's not a good sign. So
honestly,
yes.
Surprised that the movie continued to be, produced.
Yes.
When it wasn't even obviously it wasn't high budget. It's high budget, it's like millions of dollars, a lot, but maybe not relative to the people who funded it. You know what I'm saying? Maybe just be better, just be like, all right, we're done. And you wouldn't actually spend all that money on the budget anyways, considering there are probably a lot of other costs that you would have avoided by just cutting it off there.
Yeah. Yep. And to answer Miss sorry, different Stephanie. That's producer wife Stephanie in the chat. She's asking was she's fired off the set that Nick Cage walked off of, and I don't believe she was. I believe that people came to her defense, and I guess there were no incidents after that for Nick Cage to get mad enough to walk off again, is what I assume. Okay, now what happened? So, disclaimer: facts are emerging. Things will change. They've already changed. The point that I'm trying to make is that there's no circumstance. Is the overarching point of this is that there's no circumstance where this should happen. I'm going to go through the circumstances of the day as witnesses and the police department have reported them. I'm not going to say they're all accurate or telling the truth, or things won't change over time, or liabilities will shift somewhat here and there, but you'll see by the time I finish explaining that it may not matter as much as you think it should. Okay, so the first thing starts before the set even begins. For COVID safety, there was a call for handling props, including firearms, to be sanitized between takes by the armorer, then placed on a sanitized cart to then be handed to the AD, to then be handed to the actor. So we have a completely different situation now. The armorer is loading it, sanitizing it, putting it on a cart, wheeling the cart over the AD, then picks up the weapon and gives it to the actor. Now, Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, the armorer, was all they could pull together that would follow the COVID procedures and do the work, especially for what they were willing to pay. And they were not willing to give her any help. They didn't make room in the budget to give her an assistant or anything like that, which is fairly normal, I think, to have at least one assistant. So that means that many armorers were like, either it's unsafe, these COVID procedures that you're advocating for, or that's just, but like, you're not paying me enough to do all that stuff, basically. Now, the police department reports that they found 500 rounds of live ammunition, meaning ammunition with bullets, just like this replica right here, ammunition with bullets. 500 rounds of live ammunition, and we don't know whether those were being turned into blanks or not on site, or why even the heck they were there. Every master armorer I've seen says, you never, ever, in any circumstance, bring live ammunition to set. Ever. There's never any situation where live ammunition would ever be on set. So we don't know why we have 500 rounds of live ammunition on set, but it may be that she was turning them into blanks on site. And the reason why you might not pre-buy these as blanks is because they might not be available because they're old, right? So you might not be able to, no one may manufacture blanks for these. You might have to make them yourself.
Okay, but you said it's a very common, it's a very common gun we're referring to, right? Well, we're talking about, just 45 caliber, right?
Yes.
You would think this would be available in blank form, right?
No, because not all 45 caliber is the same. Not everything can be chambered in the same. The caliber of the bullet's the same, but the cartridge size and all that kind of stuff may be different.
But this is a common weapon, though, right, for movies?
Yeah, for movies, but it's not common actually in the wild.
But I'm just saying, is there no company that just makes movie stuff like this? I don't know, movie firearm stuff?
Apparently not. I guess not. I'm not saying there are no people who sell blanks for this weapon. I have no idea. It's more like trying to imagine why she would have live rounds on set. Giving her the best possible excuse, I guess, is that maybe she was making those blanks on set. Now, again, like I said, no master armorer says this should ever be a possible, even thinkable. Everyone, that idea makes them angry that there would ever be live rounds on set. Now, that morning, the crew had walked off, like I said, in protest for some unknown period of time, and then they came back. Now, my understanding, and this may be, again, subject to change as we know different things, is that some of them had taken guns from set with them when they left, which should not be possible, right?
Why did they take weapons with them?
I tell you, this is the most bizarre. I just can't even understand it.
Wait, I'm confused. They just wait. This is the protest, right?
Yes.
And they decided, let me just grab a gun real quick.
Yes.
Leave.
What specifically, what guns safety measures that were not being followed were they specifically like upset about?
Yeah, apparently the gun had gone off unintendedly, or sorry, without announcement is how they phrase it, which you're supposed to say, fire in the hole even if you're testing, right? Unannounced 3 times prior to this, and they were mad about that. There might be some other complaints that were filed as well that I'm not familiar with. So,
again, how does this person
At least
also the assistant director? Like, I don't get how they have had.
That's not good, but at least like it wasn't a live round, you know. At least they just didn't say something. It wasn't like, you know, that's not good, but you know, I'm just saying, you know, it's a lot easier for me to understand not saying like I'm about to shoot this, even though you really should, especially if you don't take it seriously. Even if you don't take it seriously, you're not gonna, you know, you're probably still gonna. I would think you would check for live rounds. You know, I don't know. I guess apparently not. I don't know.
Yeah, well, the reason you say fire in the hole is so that, you know, just in case you missed someone who might be walking past, like you didn't notice someone, they know to, like, I don't know, not get deafened, but right, or something like that, if they're not wearing ear protection and they desire to be, or even the ejecting round is hot, right? Well, in this case, there's no ejecting round because it's a revolver. But yeah, reasons like that, you might yell fire in the hole. So I think it's unexcusable either way. She should not be doing that. And they should not have taken the guns off set. And it should not have been possible for them to take the guns off set because they should be locked away if she's not attending them. Either that or on her person, which is what every master armorer says, is that it's either on their person, maintaining chain of custody, or they're locked away, maintaining chain of custody, right? Because again, someone could nefariously tamper with these things. You have no idea what might happen when your back is turned. Okay, so they took these guns away. Now here's even more worse. Some of the crew started shooting this exact gun that ends up killing Halyna with live rounds in the middle of the desert at cans for fun. So these are the very same crew that are protesting firearm safety, walk off set with the Colt 45 replica, and start plinking cans with the Colt 45 with live rounds. So
where did they get the live rounds from? Was it from the stash of live rounds that
I guess she doesn't take care of her ammunition either. I guess that's also not what's not happening.
If you're in the crew, right? You wouldn't steal bullets, though. You know what I'm saying?
I don't know. This sounds really dank to me, so I have no idea what people. I mean, they might have been so mad that they were like, "We have nowhere to go because we're in the middle of the desert, so we might as well have some fun and shoot some beer cans or something like that." I have no idea what the hell they were thinking. You know, they might have been shooting it as well in between takes. I've heard a few people say. I'm not sure which things are true, but it seems pretty clear that they were shooting them with live rounds for fun at certain points. Again, one of those was the gun that ends up killing Halyna. David Halls, the assistant director, sorry, I skipped a step. Okay, so Hannah, the armor, is seen and heard shooting the test rounds, unknown if they're blanks or not, but I'm going to assume they are because that's all that makes sense. I'm giving her the benefit of the doubt, during lunch. So she's probably testing the firearms is what I assume, during lunch. So she's firing them off. Everyone knows she is because it's loud. And so she's doing her tests. So at least by lunchtime, she had been shooting the weapon, is all that establishes. Dave Halls, the assistant director, then gives the gun... Sorry, I missed a step again. So then they set up for their shot, and while shooting, the sun moves. So here's another set safety thing. You're not, like we said earlier, you're not supposed to have the gun if you're not ready to use it in the actual take. Well, when everyone's not ready. But it sounds like in that 21-day schedule, they were rushing their shots, shot to shot, which means they were rushing their safety, which is not what it should mean, but unfortunately it seems like that's what they were doing. Dave Halls, the assistant director... Oh, come on, I keep skipping the thing in my notes. Sorry. So the sun moves from one shot to another and creates an ugly shadow. Which is very common when you're shooting out, in the wild. So they need to move the camera over a little bit to eliminate the shadow. So the DP and the director are working on, moving the camera and setting everything up. And so that's what they're doing. Now, Alec Baldwin asks for a gun. Unclear whether he asks for what he asked for. I have no idea what he asked for, but he asks for something so that he can practice, right? Dave Halls, the assistant director, then gives... Oh my gosh, I keep missing steps. Hannah, the armorer, puts the real Colt 45, or rather the Pieta 45 remake, on the cart, a plastic 45, so remember we talked many different kinds, on the cart, and a modded 45 on the cart, meaning that this is a replica that's non-functional on the cart, as per their COVID protocol, right? Then Dave Halls, the AD, as per their COVID protocol, takes the weapon off the cart and hands it to Alec Baldwin, declaring the gun cold. Now, this is according to the testimony of Alec Baldwin. He's been saying this ever since things happened, as well as I think one or two other witnesses has said that they heard him say that it declare it cold when handing it to Alec Baldwin. Alec Baldwin is very close to the crew and starts practicing his cross draw and blocking. Cross drawing is hard, so I can understand why he'd want to practice. Like
cross drawing?
It's like drawing across the waist. I'm not saying cross drawing specifically is hard. I mean quick drawing is hard, right? Like, gotcha. Acting like a Westerner, doing your quick draw and doing it correctly is hard. You can watch many outtakes from many films of them dropping the gun, accidentally, things like that, when they're trying to do their, fancy draw. So he's practicing his cross draw when he receives the gun. He receives the gun, and he does a practice shot, firing one bullet, striking Halyna, and going through her and striking the director, Joel Souza. That's the chain of events from the day, as far as I can tell. Again, subject to change. So, you want to tell me how many violations there were of firearm safety that happened here?
Yeah, I saw where this was going. All right, like obviously, it's obviously the weird stuff with the crew using it for live ammunition, but I could tell when you said she put 3 guns on a tray. I was like, all right, well, two of these don't actually work, and one of these does. I wonder which one he used.
Yep, and the thing is, if any singular step was followed, it wouldn't have happened. You only needed one of the safety steps, practically, to function. And I should have counted them, but there might be a solid 12, a dozen safety steps that were violated that would have prevented this from happening. I think the most prominent that sticks with me is the presence of live ammunition, which is so extraordinarily unthinkable to me that I just don't understand it. You don't use live ammunitions on sets ever. It just hurts my gut. And as someone who's handled a firearm, the other thing that really bothers me is the lack of verification that something is clear. This is muscle memory to me, and I've only been to the range a few times. It's such muscle memory because you understand what you're doing, right?
You're
even
not
to the
pointing at people,
right?
Why is he drawing in the direction of a person without having I don't know, just believing? So he believed what the dude said, but he didn't actually see him ever look at it, ever. Because if he did look at it, he would know. And also, the what's his name? David Hall? Is that what his name is?
Yeah.
He just took one off the tray and guessed? What happened?
Everything wrong happened. I don't know what this COVID protocol is, but there's no situation where the chain of custody should have been broken with anyone. A firearm is not a firearm is can be more dangerous than COVID if you fire it unintendedly, or there's a live round in it, or if there's even a blank in it and someone's fooling around and shoots someone, right? It's not a joke. I don't understand what the heck. Here, I'll go through it. So the legal exposure and everything that went wrong goes as follows in the order of handling and violating protocol. So first, the producers, not Baldwin per se, but maybe Baldwin as well, I have no idea, put COVID safety above gun safety. Doesn't make any sense. Second, they did not institute a no live round policy, which is a no-brainer. Third, they may not have provided...
Or they did, but it wasn't followed, right? It's also possible that they said no live rounds, but someone just brought live rounds anyways.
Now, she's not an idiot, right? And her dad apparently has been training her since she was 18. So, like, I presume that she understood the danger of bringing live rounds to set, but I presume that the circumstances of shooting made her feel like she had to do it this way. That's my benefit of the doubt, was that there was no... I'll say. The thing is that what I see everyone say is, even if you're making the blanks on yourself, it's done off-site and often by a third party. So you hire someone who literally is taking these 500 rounds and in some warehouse who's plucking the bullets off of these things, and then they give it to you, and then you bring it to set, so that there's never a live round ever in the mixture. And clearly they did not have that policy. That's up to the producers to do, right? Like, she can't hire someone to do it offset for her, or give herself time to do that offset if they don't provide her that time. Which I'm not saying that exonerates her at all. But the last thing that the producers did wrong was that they overworked the crew to death. Do not do this if you have safety concerns. If you don't have enough money, maybe pay yourself a little less, kind of part of what I'm thinking. But also, 21 days is absurd to have, like, these kinds of safety things. I mean, at this point, if I had a 21-day shoot and I had to bring my safety team down to this low, I would just not do it with hot guns. I just not do it. That's the simple solution. Don't do it if you can't afford it. That's the simple solution. Then on some crews' behalf, some of them fed live ammunition into a prop gun, which is terrible. They illegally shot this thing. I'm convinced it's almost certainly illegal. In undesignated areas, you're not allowed to shoot. I don't think in any state you're allowed to just shoot anywhere, like, for target practice, for obvious reasons. And on Hannah's behalf, the armorer, she went along with the unsafe COVID rules when clearly a lot of armorers were not willing to, because it was unsafe. And she should know that she could not ensure safety through the rules as they stood. So she should have not gone along with it. Second thing is, she didn't maintain the chain of custody. Well, she could at least be at the cart at all times, at least, right? Or she could at least have control over all her stuff at all times, right? Third, she kept live rounds on set to make blanks. I don't care if she was, like I said, she has some culpability. I don't care if she, felt like she had to do it. I mean, I do care, because that adds culpability to other people as well. But at the same time, you have to know that that's never going to be safe, and you should just say flat out, I cannot do this, because someone may die, and that's more important than me doing this job, right? 4, she clearly did not properly check or reload each bullet into the gun in front of the AD as required by normal protocol. She should have been loading this thing one by one with blanks, and it's, like I said, the shapes are very different. You can't confuse a blank unless you're literally not looking at it. One has a bullet on it, one does not. So, she's feeding these one by one back in, and she should have that ready for the AD to check, and not give it off until the AD checks. Even if she has to put it on the cart, which I don't even understand that protocol, which is a whole other thing. I feel like more people end up touching the thing, which I don't get it. But and the last thing is, she did not personally hand the gun to Baldwin, which she should have insisted on. Goes back to the COVID problems again. The assistant director, David Halls, he didn't attend, apparently, safety meetings frequently in the morning. So he just didn't go to them. Which is crazy. And this might be also the fault of the producers and the director as well. But he did not follow the union rules about firearms between takes and ballistic safety. If you're going to be shooting anywhere near the camera, either you literally operate the camera remotely, which is extraordinarily easy, by the way. If I can do it, they can do it. I can operate my camera like, without being literally right next to it. I can hit the record button and move away, like, or if they need to move the camera in some way, if they're on a dolly system, there are remote dolly, like you can remote control a dolly system. That's not new technology. So there's no reason that she had to be there. Any of them had to be there while they were switching stuff, or even while they were shooting. Which is apparently the presumption is that by all means you remove anyone from the line of fire, even if you're using blanks, right? But even then, you remove everyone, and then you provide barriers according to union rules, like sandbags and ballistic shields for anyone else who might even be facing the direction at all, who might have to be in that direction at all. These are union rules, and remember, this is a unionized set. The third thing the assistant director did wrong was that he did not personally verify the gun was cold. Blanks versus live rounds don't matter, which is what everyone is making a big deal about. If he said it was cold, he said it was empty. He didn't say it had blanks in it or that it was clear. He said cold. That means that there's nothing in here, which is insane. That means he didn't check because it's so easy to see. Unlike, once it's loaded, it's hard to see whether they're blanks or not, right? You would have to trust the armor or unload them. That's why the armor is supposed to load them in front of him, right? But empty looks a lot different from, loaded, hot. Empty looks like this. Oh, that's not empty. Empty looks like this. That's what empty looks like. That's what cold looks like. Completely different. So clearly he didn't check. I see no other way that makes any sense. And then he did not present the weapon for Baldwin to check as well. He clearly handed it off before Baldwin checked himself, right? Or else Baldwin would have clearly noticed the obviously not empty chamber. So there's problems there. And then Alec Baldwin did not verify that the gun was cold. You don't assume the status of a firearm. It's just very easy on this type of firearm to just rotate the cylinders, each one of them, before you start practicing. It's very simple to see if you see brass in any of them. Just do it 6 times. It takes all of 10 seconds. And then he pointed a real gun, cold, hot, or live, at a person on a set with a set that was knowingly using blanks, even if he didn't know there were live munitions on set. He knew that they were using blanks at least, which could be dangerous anyway between takes. And the last thing is that he took off the safety, even though he was practicing. There's no reason to pull the trigger when you're practicing your cross draw. You can pull on a dead trigger. You can pull on a trigger that safety is on at least.
Did he do that, or did someone else earlier in the chain of command do that and he didn't pay attention to it?
That could also be the case, but then he's still at fault because he didn't check the safety. These things don't it's hard for me to explain to you without you occupying the firearms community how unthinkable these things are. It's far from thinkable. These things aren't. Yeah.
But just out of curiosity, how much of this stuff is explained to actors who aren't familiar with firearms?
Well, in his particular case, is extremely familiar. I remember I can't remember which position, it might have been a producer or something, remarking that one of the reasons they really trusted him, I think it might have been a crew member, was one of the reasons they presumed to trust him is he had extensive experience doing such things with blanks, So he's been trained. You're not allowed to do these things. You're not allowed to touch a gun that can fire until you're trained, usually at least.
Generally, though, who's responsible? I'm assuming most actors, don't. Well, unless you have done a lot of such films, but do you who's responsible for training the actor in gun safety before they start using the armor is. Yep.
You're supposed to spend, and apparently this armorer did spent time with the actor at the range. So you go to a controlled environment and you verify, even if they're experienced, that their safety is good, their safety protocol is good, that they do things naturally. I don't know what happened in this case. I can imagine she's 24, she's new to everything. She's not going to tell Alec Baldwin what to do. If he's done this 1,000,001 times, you can imagine the dynamic might be bad for verifying safety in this particular kind of case. Alec Baldwin's I've shot literally maybe 50,000 of these rounds, like not exaggerating, that might be the case. And I've never had a problem. So, this is a formality for me, So, or maybe they didn't even do it. I have no idea. No, actually, no. They did do it. Yeah.
Did you see Steph's last message? I don't know if you responded to
that. Yeah, she said he should have been using a rubber one to practice his blocking. If you're giving a rubber gun, would you still say cold, or would you just say it's rubber? I think, I'm not actually sure what the term you would use is. I would probably say cold, and then it would become very obvious once you hold it that it's not a real gun because it's a rubber gun. That's the other thing, by the way. A loaded firearm feels very different weight-wise. This sounds kind of like you have to be an expert to know this, but you don't. Like, I remember the first time I loaded... A full mag is different than 6 rounds, of course, but I still think, like, bullets, these rounds weigh a lot more than you think. They make up for the total weight a lot more than you think. So I remember picking up the gun and being, that's heavy. Then I loaded the mag and being like, that's a lot heavier. You know what I mean? So it's kind of bizarre that he didn't instinctually feel, because I remember, picking up from the table at the range, I would know, pretty quickly, I've got a magazine in there, just from the weight, just from human intuition, So I think that's also bizarre. And also, like, this is like I said, this is extremely commonplace. So many actors are trained in this, extraordinarily commonplace. If you ever shot a gun in a movie, there's a high likelihood you would have been trained, beyond a certain budget, of course. So that's what happened. The final thing I'll say, I was going to say a whole other thing, but it's getting really late. So I'm sorry for the really long episode. But the last thing I got to say is that there's a lot of reactions to this, and I understand it. But I think a lot of it doesn't understand how commonplace these things are, and that the risk analysis for most people in these situations is not, a big deal for most people. Like, most of these people on set are used to this kind of risk management. It's not, I've read a lot of testimonies from crew who are not even armorers who said, I've witnessed thousands and thousands and thousands of rounds go off on sets, and not even one safety protocol was violated not even violated, never mind accidents, right? But I think even more important is that just looking at the record, the last time someone died from this was Brandon Lee, as far as I could check. I tried really hard to figure it out. The famous Brandon Lee case, which was, I don't have the year on top of me, but I believe it was about 30 years ago.
I think it was 1991.
No, actually, aware of that.
Yeah. So I think it was about 30 years ago. So, I think as far as I can tell in the United States, this is the last time someone has died from a firearm on set. And that case is actually a lot less egregious than this case. And a lot of things changed actually because of that case. So you're taking a calculated risk, and 1 in 30 years, you may not like that risk, but everyone on set understands that risk when they're going into it. Or at least everyone who's not new to this kind of thing, which, industry generally understands the kind of risks they're getting into when they're doing this kind of stuff. In fact, stunts are extraordinarily dangerous. Extraordinarily. Like, there's probably a death a year in stunts, which, in the grand scheme of how many stunts are being done a year, is not, is not the worst. But I don't like that figure. Like, the idea that once a year someone dies on a major set in the United States due to doing stunts is, a lot more disturbing to me. And most of those are motor vehicle related things. So I think most recently there was a stunt woman who was on a motorcycle, and something grotesque happened to her when she hit a truck. So I won't go into details there, but it's stunts are quite dangerous in general. And I think partly that if you've seen I've seen the behind the scenes of Jackie Chan movies, it's because a lot of it's just straight up real. Like, you don't understand.
That's what I was thinking of. Jackie Chan, he's broken bones many times, right?
Yeah, they're not. The stunts are not safe. Stunt actors know this, by the way. That's why they have huge life insurance policies. But they love it so much that apparently they would never. They don't care. If you hear them speak, they just say it's a it's a risk I'm willing to take to do what I love. So I don't know. I guess I don't understand that, but yeah. Right. And the last thing I'll say is that everyone's focusing on Alec Baldwin. Let me tell you that in terms of civil liability, everyone's about to get sued. As they should, by the way. Everyone's about to get sued. Alec Baldwin's about to get sued. The production's about to get sued. The AD's about to get sued. Hannah's about to get sued. Several crew members who might have been involved are about to get sued. Everyone's about to get sued, as they should be sued. Just because something happens doesn't mean there's one singular thing happens, doesn't mean there's one singular person who has liability. I see a lot of articles where people are just trying to point a finger at one person. That's not how real life works. Unfortunately, it seems as though practically, like, almost the entire environment isn't responsible. Alec Baldwin's responsible. I was taught with my firearms training that I'm responsible for every round that comes out of my gun, intentional or not. That even if I'm told that I'm given a unloaded gun, if I shoot that thing and it's loaded and it hits someone, it's not the person who tells me that it's clear incorrectly's fault. Ultimately, it's ultimately my fault. That's what was bored into my head, upon training. So, I don't think I'd see a lot of his fans responding to a lot of his, tweets. Which, by the way, Alec Baldwin, stop tweeting. Like, what are you doing? Like, this is an active case. Like, do you not have a lawyer? Don't.
What was he saying?
Speak.
Oh yeah. Also, yeah.
He's saying stupid things. What?
You probably shouldn't be saying anything, and this is literally, I didn't do it. That's probably the most you should ever say.
You can say, I'm sorry that this happened, and you probably should I guess I should say, I'm sorry this happened, and, awaiting investigation, I don't want to comment. That's perfectly fine. I think everyone should understand that. But he's running his mouth about stuff that happened that he thinks exonerates him. He's literally digging the hole for himself, which is so annoying to me. Because he's saying, oh, they told me the gun was cold, and he thinks that's an excuse, which tells me that he had no respect for the firearm that he had. That's what that tells me, is that he just believed them, and he thought, and to the point where even after the fact, he thinks that's an excuse, that believing them is an excuse. To me, that's the opposite. That means you're reckless. If you think it's an excuse even now, unless you're trying to win the court of public opinion with your fans or something like that, who have no idea, about the culture of firearm safety. And unfortunately, where I see a lot of people vibing with what he's saying, and like I'm saying, it's not his entire fault. I'm not saying that. I percent of blame I'm not going to apply at all, but certainly there is some fault on his hands for her death, and I just don't like that he's acting the way he is around it. And if he has lawyers could strangle him, I'm sure they would, because he's already lawyered up. So I assume his lawyers want to strangle him. They can't literally control what he says, I guess. So, and the final thing is that Hannah's lawyers released a statement saying, where is it? I lost it, but they basically issued a statement saying that she did everything she could. It was a high pressure environment, that it was too rough for her to handle. She was doing 2 jobs at once. I don't know what this is a reference to. It might be a reference to the fact that she was making blunts and handling firearm safety, which almost certainly should be 2 people. And that she did the best she could, but that the environment essentially killed her. I completely disagree. Ultimately speaking, I think that's partly true, but not fully true. That's what a lawyer would say to get rid of any liability. I think there is some liability on her behalf as well. In terms of criminal liability, lastly, I have no earthly clue. I'm like 90% sure that there's criminal negligence at least on Alec Baldwin's behalf. this it's very so much state by state. So I will comment on that. Whether or not he should be charged is not something I'm going to answer. I just hope that everyone treats this consistently, that the Hollywood halo doesn't save him if it shouldn't save him. If a prosecutor would normally overlook this case and say, well, the factors surrounding it were so egregious that, I don't want to prosecute something like this, then if that would be normally the case, then fine. If that's not normally the case, and if you can't show me that would normally be the case, then you should try him. That's what justice is, right? Justice is equal application of the law. So, he should have no Hollywood defense, although I think that's ultimately what's going to happen is no one will get in criminal trouble because of the nature of how it happened, even though they probably violated 10 laws. So, yeah, that's it. I went on for almost 2 hours, and I really apologize for that. But it's a complicated story.
I don't know. I mean, my thought, and I'm sure it's not popular in the film community, I just don't see what the benefit of its extra realism is. I mean, there's so many other corners that films cut in realism that why does recoil and smoke, why is that so important? I don't watch Star Wars and see Han Solo firing his laser gun and say, wow, that doesn't look realistic enough to me. I don't think that's what a laser gun would look like. I don't get what the push for realism with guns is.
At least with Star Wars, the beauty is that it's not realistic at all. So it's in Star Wars, right? I remember the scene where Darth Vader walked. I think it's in Rogue One at the end of it. Darth Vader just walks into space and he's just chilling. He's fine. There's wind in space too. And it's it's kind of just
Darth.
It's Star Wars.
Sure I know. I don't. It's very
the very end of Rogue One. Darth Vader is chasing after people, all right?
Yeah, he's in the hallway.
Yeah, and then the ship leaves, right? The ship detaches and he goes out into space where the ship once was, essentially.
Really?
He's standing on almost like a balcony if you think about it. He's standing on the floor, but it's exposed to space.
Even so, I mean, Vader would be the person who would survive that, given his.
Okay, that's true. But I'm just saying, there's wind in space.
That's different. That's different than Leia, magically using the Force while unconscious to save herself flying through space.
Yeah,
which is not good. But
yeah.
I think
it depends on the movie, right? Because as I pointed out in the Discord, a lot of action movies, they don't care about recoil, actually, right? They're just it looks like they're literally doing nothing when they shoot. It looks like there's a bit of flash and then nothing else happens, Whereas something, I don't know, if I'm watching Dunkirk, for example, right? I would expect for that to not be the case, just because it focuses, it's more immersive in realism, and it would feel weird if nothing they did felt real, I guess. So I guess it depends. I don't really know what the movie they're filming is like, so I don't know if it was warranted.
How much do you know, what real even looks like? Well, and how much capacity do you have to pay attention to that in the moment, right?
I think the difference is more in feel than literally knowing, and I think the difference is bigger than you think. In terms of feel, there's a reason they would spend so much money doing these kinds of things, much like there's a reason they would spend so much money doing real stunts as well. You could say that every ragdoll in every action movie should be either a dummy or a CG ragdoll, which is the case in some certain scenes in certain movies. Like in Fast and Furious movies, there's a lot of CG bodies in there. The thing is, it feels like CG bodies. I don't think I would notice that they're CG bodies because I'm a filmmaker. I think either subconsciously or, frankly, I think consciously too, the audience notices the CG bodies flying around in Fast and Furious or Marvel movies or anything like that. I think the difference is actually that starkly different, even with firearms, if you don't have a fast-paced action scene. The only time where it probably doesn't matter, and that's where they don't use them anyway, is when you have cut, or those crazy sort of action scenes where everyone's flipping around and stuff like that. But if you have a Western where someone's standing there menacingly and they're about to quick draw and fire, it's going to be a world of a difference to the audience, where there's no cutting, no film trickery or anything like that. and it's just the actual practical effect living for what it is. And I just think it's so common that it doesn't strike anyone as odd when they see gunfire, when it really should strike them as odd that they look so good.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm of a different mind here. I think films cut corners in so many other budget corners and realism corners in so many other ways that like why those sorts of things get priority. I don't really understand. Like, pay for a live orchestra first before you worry about that sort of thing, you know?
Well, what's more important is like going to be, it's a creative decision at the end of the day. Like, to me, it's just a tool in the toolbox. Whether you use it or not is just up to whether the scene needs it or not. It's not a should or shouldn't sort of thing. I wouldn't use it in every scene either, especially if it makes safety particularly difficult. But I would definitely use it in a war film. Like, I promise you, Saving Private Ryan would not look good at all. Like, it would not just look slightly bad. It would look terrible if they were not using blanks the entire time, because they're in the trenches. The dirt reacts to the blow of gas at the end of the muzzle, and I'm not looking for it, right? But it happens, and I still see it and interpret it, and it feels more visceral and real to me. Those squibs in the ground don't need to be there either, but it's all to contribute to this atmosphere that maybe the layman doesn't understand what's going on, but they internalize it as more real because we're used to seeing real things, So our brains are better than we think at telling real versus fake.
I guess. I mean, I can speak from experience. I'll be like, in the background while my mom's watching TV, and I'll be like doing dishes and she's watching whatever, some show on, and I'll just like laugh and say, and these virtual instruments are so bad. And she's like, what are you talking about? And I didn't even know there was music going on. I'm like it's maybe I'll notice if they're using virtual instruments in this show, but does the average person even notice that there's music there? Much less like, oh, that oboe doesn't really move in the most human manner. Like, I don't know. I personally, I think that like some people will notice some things that are not realistic, but like go for realism where it's practical and impactful.
I actually disagree with you.
I don't think as many people notice these things, but
I actually have to go now.
Oh no! We'll do your the Battlefront thing next time.
Yeah, we can do that next time.
Okay. Yeah, sorry about that.
That was fine. It was interesting because it would be a lot worse if it was like a 30-minute segment, and then we got like the last 30 minutes of what you said, and it's like, okay, it's not that much background, and there's a lot to it. It was not a simple story, I guess.
Yeah, I did a lot of research, so hit the thumbs up if you. I was reading all day, so hit the thumbs up if you appreciate the amount of research. But yeah, in defense of the music thing, I beg to differ. I would.
I'm actually gonna leave now.
That's cool. Yeah, I'll talk to you later.
See ya. Bye.
I disagree. I think that music would absolutely be noticed. Maybe not in their absence, but in the presence, right? Like, I think there's a reason why Star Wars music is so revered universally, whether you're a music fan or not. I think it's because it's so beautiful that it calls it, like, you can't help but to notice how beautiful it is. And I think for me at least, I can't watch a show and hear electronic instruments and not notice. I get that I look for those kinds of things, but like it's hard for me to imagine that the general audience doesn't at least feel affected by it. Like, it contributes to the total effect of what's going on, So, in defense of music. Oh, sorry, I can't hear you. Give me a second.
Spend your budget on that sort of thing first, and don't cut corners. Like, I don't know. I feel like I just think that Hollywood is selective. It seems like they're kind of selective about what they want to be realistic about and what they don't. And, in some case, and I don't think that the realism necessarily is always the most noticeable thing. And if you're going to be selective about it, then do it in a way that, like, is actually impactful. And I think the music is probably more, impactful and noticeable, even if you're not listening to it as carefully as I am. Then, I've read some articles on this, and like it seemed like most people were actually concerned about the muzzle flash, not so much about the recoil.
Yeah, that's fake news.
Like, okay, and they're saying, like it's the light, how the light affects the, from the gun affects the environment.
That's true too, actually. Yeah.
Like, okay, so if that's so important, I mean, I've never looked at a laser shot in Star Wars and said, wow, that gas, the laser gas, whatever it is, it's called Tabana gas, I think, in Star Wars canon. That would definitely make a brighter flash across the entire environment. So wow, this is, I just noticed that shot is unrealistic.
Well,
I mean,
again,
I don't.
From the VFX background, though, those are actually details they spend a lot of time painting into the scene with the even in Star Wars. But the thing is, they have to paint it in, especially back then. They spent time like doing all the highlights of whether it's a lightsaber or it's I don't know the names of these things. Sorry, the bolt thing. Whether it's any of those things, those flashes are manually painted onto the edges of like people's bodies and like on the edges of objects and things like that, and it achieves it like extremely well. But it's hard. I think maybe I should have had
not good enough. Like
in that case, I think it's good enough because of the genre. But like if I were to put two, like I said, when in VFX, like this is one of the first things you learn, right? So like, what the sad reality is of every VFX artist who teaches you this very basic thing of VFXing in gunshots is that it's never going to look right because it's just not right. It's actually not physically accurate. Like there's nothing right about it, and it's a lamentable thing to VFX artists because they would rather have the practical assist them in selling the VFX, right? And it's hard to explain without literally having an example, and maybe I should have had one, but like it's like a big difference. I don't know how else to say it. Unless you're going to spend, especially if you're in a Western with like, 300 rounds going off potentially throughout the entire film, it's very hard to paint those things in frame by frame for every single thing and have it consistently look good. I don't know. I think it's a more case by case basis than it is like something where we can just say this versus that or something like that, And I think generally speaking, it's treated case by case because not every scene has blanks in it, and not every film goes no blanks. Like there's a case by case basis depending. So I don't know. That's my opinion, at least.
Yeah, I don't know. I my opinion is definitely that Hollywood selectively chooses what it wants to spend for realism. Where, like I mentioned when I watched Black Widow. I mean, come on, how hard is it? You could have paid me $5 to check the Russian in that film. You could have paid me no money and I would have done it for you, but they didn't do that. And if you know any Russian, the film is kind of silly because of that, right? Like there are some words that are just have accents in the wrong place, and then there's the kind of climactic line that just doesn't work because it's not right. But I mean, to the average person, does it? No, they don't care. But if you know Russian, then like that really is a violation of realism. I just laughed when I heard that. Okay, like you could have avoided that very easily.
But the thing is, I don't think they're analogous because basically no one understands Russian, whereas physics is just universal. Like people's brains interpret physics universally.
But see, I don't think I would look at a gunfire, a gunshot, and be able to tell you that wasn't realistic enough recoil.
But I think I don't know. I guess I'm just saying it without an example. But if I were to throw up an example of VFX versus real, I think you would be able to tell which one looks better, like pretty easily. That's what I'm saying. Is like it's actually a much bigger delta between the two than I think people think, especially for scenes where there's not like crazy cutting from one cut to another or something like that. So
Yeah, but if you're willing to like spend money for this kind of realism and potentially have problems, even though, in theory, if you follow these safety steps, there shouldn't be, but there's still a risk, then why can you not spend $5 to check the Russian in your film?
I don't disagree with you. I would definitely have the Russian checked in my kind of film. So like, I don't understand that even personally. I would do that, but I don't think it has to be a dichotomy. Like I don't think it's as.
Yeah, okay. I'm not saying that it has to be a dichotomy. I'm saying that it seems to be like that Hollywood is being selective in certain things.
Yeah, that might be the case. I have no idea. Yeah, that might be the case. I can imagine people prioritizing the realism of some things or another because I think about some things more than others, and that might be a more unfortunate thing with creatives not thinking well about how to produce things well and get the best end result than it is like about the inherent safety of the thing, which I think is. I mean, it's safer than roller coasters, and roller coasters are extraordinarily safe. There's a roller coaster death. Maybe actually, I can count the number of I can actually recite to you all the stories of roller coaster deaths for the past 100 years in the United States because I'm a roller coaster nerd as of late, and I could tell you them all because there's probably about like 20, and there's videos about all of them, and they have like millions of views because people are attracted to danger. But there's only 20, right? So they're extraordinarily safe. It's just a matter of like perspective of like, okay, is it worth it to get on a roller coaster, even though it's an elevated risk from walking around, right? You're literally flying around in a 2-ton train, pulling forces up and down, and it's not an inherently safe task, but it's made safe by the safety precautions and safety systems, much like, dealing with firearms is, sort of that way too. Like, you have safety precautions, safety systems. When they're on, you have less chance to die than you would even have on a roller coaster. Then I can see that being an acceptable risk. Whereas like stunts once a year, that's actually a little bit more like concerning to me, from a acceptable risk standpoint.
Yeah. I mean, I was reading this week, just because I was talking to someone, responding to someone's comment online, questioning, getting into whether Kathleen Kennedy's contract is going to be renewed or not, which is neither here nor there, but about how much money Star Wars, the sequel trilogy made, when accounting for not just, people tend to, especially if they're trying to defend her, will quote just the raw revenue, which doesn't account for how much the budget was. Or as I've learned from you, also you have to take into account the marketing. So I was trying to look up the actual budget for just The Force Awakens, and that came up with like they also Disney had to pay a $2 million lawsuit because when Harrison Ford was walking out of the set Millennium Falcon, the door fell on his foot and crushed. Yeah. And so he was like in the hospital, had to be like, mechanically repaired with a whole bunch of screws. And also J.J. Abrams, the director, like dislocated one of the discs in his back because he was trying to lift the door off of Harrison Ford. So that resulted in a $2 million fine for Disney for safety violations in set construction. Like you wouldn't think Disney and like something as large as Star Wars would have problems like that.
Yeah.
Clearly these things are not quite as safe as you'd imagine that they are.
No, sets are actually a lot more dangerous than people think. Lights fall on people all the time. Things fall on people all the time on sets. And like I said, stunts are actually just not safe, straight up. So just being on a set is an elevated risk in of itself. So, Yeah, yeah, you are still frozen on the screen. Yeah, I'll post examples of on Discord if I get a chance. Of I'll post the video of where I first learned how to do virtual gunfire. I'll be nostalgic for me to go back to, um, and I'll post it on the Discord, and you can see it doesn't look very good. I mean, yeah, it looks good enough if that's all you can do, and if that's all that's safe, that's all you can do. So, yeah, it is what it is. Okay, so that's the thing. I successfully took something that was a Twitter battle, and I spent 2 hours breaking it down into its constituent parts. So please smash the like button and subscribe if you enjoyed that or liked any aspect of that. I don't know, Ben. Do you still want to do your arguing with Reddit thing, or are you like pooped out?
It might be just a good idea to save that for next week at this point.
Okay, I'm really sorry, everyone, for going on so long. Hopefully it was entertaining. There's a lot of people who have stuck around this entire time, so I'm going to assume it was entertaining to some extent. Even on Rumble, we had a few people sticking around. Right now, none. I think it's because we wound down a little bit. But, throughout the conversation, we had, some people hanging around on Rumble as well, which is pretty cool. So I really appreciate you guys listening to me ramble. And I ask that, again, if you pray for Halyna's soul, and just make sure that everything that we do is done with nuance and just care. And I think especially these days, like, there's nothing worth another person's life, right? So if you're a lower person on a set or in any hierarchy, this happens in all fields actually, there's a name for this effect, and you feel like something is being overlooked, please just walk away rather than go along with it. That would be the best thing to do. If there's a lot of stories across industries, airlines, roller coasters, across industries where this is very exact same thing happens, where chain of command matters more than the safety aspect of things. So, yeah, just be brave out there, guys. With that, you can follow us anywhere in the description. I'll probably split this into like 2 or 3 parts. And we'll see you next time, next week at 7 p.m. on Fridays.
Yep, thanks for listening and watching.
See ya.